Part I. of Book II. of On the Nature of the Gods, by Marcus Tullius Cicero, translated by Charles Duke Yonge. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. When Cotta had thus concluded, Velleius replied, I certainly was inconsiderate to engage in argument with an academician who is likewise a rhetorician. I should not have feared an academician without eloquence, nor a rhetorician without that philosophy, however eloquent he might be, for I am never puzzled by an empty flow of words, nor by the most subtle reasonings delivered without any grace of oratory. But you, Cotta, have excelled in both. You only wanted the assembly and the judges. However, enough of this at present. Now let us hear what Lucilius has to say, if it is agreeable to him. I had much rather, says Balbus, hear Cotta resume his discourse, and demonstrate the true gods with the same eloquence which he made use of to explode the false. For on such a subject, the loose, unsettled doctrine of the Academy does not become a philosopher, a priest, a Cotta, whose opinions should be, like those we hold, firm and certain. Epicurus has been more than sufficiently refuted, but I would willingly hear your own sentiments, Cotta. Do you forget, replies Cotta, what I at first said, that it is easier for me, especially on this point, to explain what opinions those are which I do not hold, rather than what those are which I do? Nay, even if I did feel some certainty on any particular point, yet, after having been so diffuse myself already, I would prefer now hearing you speak in your turn. I submit, says Balbus, and will be as brief as I possibly can. For as you have confuted the errors of Epicurus, my part in the dispute will be shorter. Our sect divide the whole question concerning the immortal gods into four parts. First, they prove that there are gods. Secondly, of what character and nature they are. Thirdly, that the universe is governed by them. And lastly, that they exercise a superintendence over human affairs. But in this present discussion, let us confine ourselves to the first two articles, and defer the third and fourth till another opportunity, as they require more time to discuss. By no means, says Cotta, for we have time enough on our hands. Besides that, we are now discussing a subject which should be preferred even to serious business. The first point, then, says Lucilius, I think needs no discourse to prove it. For what can be so plain and evident, when we behold the heavens and contemplate the celestial bodies, as the existence of some supreme, divine intelligence by which all these things are governed? Were it otherwise, Ennius would not, with a universal approbation, have said, quote, look up to the refulgent heaven above, which all men call unanimously Jove. Close quote. This is Jupiter, the governor of the world, who rules all things with his nod, and is, as the same Ennius adds, quote, of gods and men, the sire. Close quote. An omnipresent and omnipotent God. And if any one doubts this, I really do not understand why the same man may not also doubt whether there is a sun or not. For what can possibly be more evident than this? And if it were not a truth universally impressed on the minds of men, the belief in it would never have been so firm, nor would it have been, as it is, increased by length of years, nor would it have gathered strength and stability through every age. And in truth, we see that other opinions, being false and groundless, have already fallen into oblivion by lapse of time. Who now believes in hippocentaurs and chimeras? Or what old woman is now to be found so weak and ignorant as to stand in fear of those infernal monsters which once so terrified mankind? For time destroys the fictions of error and opinion, while it confirms the determinations of nature and of truth. And therefore it is that, both among us and among other nations, sacred institutions and the divine worship of the Gods have been strengthened and improved from time to time. And this is not to be imputed to chance or folly, but to the frequent appearance of the Gods themselves. In the war with the Latins, when A. Postumius, the dictator, attacked Octavius Mamilius, the Tusculan, at Regillus, Castor and Pollux were seen fighting in our army on horseback. And since that, the same offspring of Tyndareus gave notice of the defeat of Perses; for as P. Vatienus, the grandfather of the present young man of that name, was coming in the night to Rome from his government of Reate, two young men on white horses appeared to him, and told him that King Perses was that day taken prisoner. This news he carried to the Senate, who immediately threw him into prison for speaking inconsiderately on a state affair. But when it was confirmed by letters from Paulus, he was recompensed by the Senate with land and immunities. Nor do we forget, when the Locrians defeated the people of Crotone in a great battle on the banks of the river Sagra, that it was known the same day at the Olympic games. The voices of the Fauns have been often heard, and deities have appeared in forms so visible that they have compelled every one who is not senseless or hardened in impiety to confess the presence of the Gods. What do predictions and foreknowledge of future events indicate, but that such future events are shown, pointed out, portended, and foretold to men? From whence they are called omens, signs, portents, prodigies. But though we should esteem fabulous what is said of Mopsus, Tiresias, Amphiaraus, Calchas, and Helenos, who would not have been delivered down to us as augurs, even in fable, if their art had been despised, may we not be sufficiently apprised of the power of the Gods by domestic examples? Will not the temerity of P. Claudius in the first Punic war affect us, who, when the poultry were let out of the coop and would not feed, ordered them to be thrown into the water, and, joking even upon the Gods, said with a sneer, "Let them drink, since they will not eat"? Which piece of ridicule, being followed by a victory over his fleet, cost him many tears, and brought great calamity on the Roman people. Did not his colleague Junius in the same war lose his fleet in a tempest by disregarding the auspices? Claudius, therefore, was condemned by the people, and Junius killed himself. Coelius says that P. Flaminius, from his neglect of religion, fell at Thrasymene, a loss which the public severely felt. By these instances of calamity, we may be assured that Rome owes her grandeur and success to the conduct of those who were tenacious of their religious duties. And if we compare ourselves to our neighbours, we shall find that we are infinitely distinguished above foreign nations by our zeal for religious ceremonies, though in other things we may be only equal to them, and in other respects even inferior to them. Ought we to contemn Attius Navius's staff, with which he divided the regions of the vine to find his sow? I should despise it if I were not aware that King Hostilius had carried on most important wars in deference to his auguries; but by the negligence of our nobility, the discipline of the augury is now omitted, the truth of the auspices despised, and only a mere form observed; so that the most important affairs of the commonwealth, even the wars on which the public safety depends, are conducted without any auspices. The paremnia are discussed, no part of the iumnia performed. No select men are called to witness to the military testaments. Our generals now begin their wars as soon as they have arranged the auspicia. The force of religion was so great among our ancestors, that some of their commanders have, with their faces veiled, and with the solemn, formal expressions of religion, sacrificed themselves to the immortal gods to save their country. I could mention many of the Sibylline prophecies, and many answers of the haruspices, to confirm those things which ought not to be doubted. For example, our augurs and the Etrurian haruspices saw the truth of their art established when P. Scipio and C. Figulus were consuls. For as Tiberius Gracchus, who was a second time consul, wished to proceed to a fresh election, the first rogator, as he was collecting the suffrages, fell down dead on the spot. Gracchus nevertheless went on with the assembly, but perceiving that this accident had a religious influence on the people, he brought the affair before the senate. The senate thought fit to refer it to those who usually took cognizance of such things. The haruspices were called, and declared that the man who had acted as rogator of the assembly had no right to do so; to which, as I have heard my father say, he replied with great warmth, "Have I no right, who am consul and augur, and favoured by the auspicia? And shall you, who are Tuscans and barbarians, pretend that you have authority over the Roman auspicia, and a right to give judgment in matters respecting the formality of our assemblies?" Therefore he then commanded them to withdraw; but not long afterward he wrote from his province to his college of augurs, acknowledging that in reading the books he remembered that he had illegally chosen a place for his tent in the gardens of Scipio, and had afterward entered the pomoerium in order to hold a senate, but that in repassing the same pomoerium he had forgotten to take the auspices, and that therefore the consuls had been created informally. The augurs laid the case before the senate. The senate decreed that they should resign their charge, and so they accordingly abdicated. What greater example need we seek for? The wisest, perhaps, the most excellent of men, chose to confess his fault, which he might have concealed, rather than leave the public the least atom of religious guilt; and the consuls chose to quit the highest office in the state, rather than fill it for a moment in defiance of religion. How great is the reputation of the augurs! And is not the art of the soothsayers divine? And must not every one who sees what innumerable instances of the same kind there are, confess the existence of the Gods? For they who have interpreters must certainly exist themselves. Now, there are interpreters of the Gods, therefore we must allow there are Gods. But it may be said, perhaps, that all predictions are not accomplished. We may as well conclude there is no art of physic, because all sick persons do not recover. The Gods show us signs of future events. If we are occasionally deceived in the results, it is not to be imputed to the nature of the Gods, but to the conjectures of men. All nations agree that there are Gods. The opinion is innate, and, as it were, engraved in the minds of all men. The only point in dispute among us is what they are. Their existence no one denies. Cleanthes, one of our sect, imputes the way in which the idea of the Gods is implanted in the minds of men to four causes. The first is that which I just now mentioned, the foreknowledge of future things. The second is the great advantages which we enjoy from the temperature of the air, the fertility of the earth, and the abundance of various benefits of other kinds. The third cause is deduced from the terror with which the mind is affected by thunder, tempests, storms, snow, hail, devastation, pestilence, earthquakes, often attended with hideous noises, showers of stones, and rain like drops of blood, by rocks and sudden openings of the earth, by monstrous births of men and beasts, by meteors in the air, and blazing stars, by the Greeks called Komaitai, and by us Crinitai, the appearance of which, in the late Octavian war, were foreboders of great calamities, by two suns which, as I have heard my father say, happened in the consulate of Tuditanus and Aquilius, and in which year also another sun, P. Africanus, was extinguished. These things terrified mankind, and raised in them a firm belief of the existence of some celestial and divine power. His fourth cause, and that the strongest, is drawn from the regularity of the motion and revolution of the heavens, the distinctness, variety, beauty, and order of the sun, moon, and all the stars, the appearance only of which is sufficient to convince us they are not the effects of chance, as when we enter into a house, or school, or court, and observe the exact order, discipline, and method of it, we cannot suppose that it is so regulated without a cause, but must conclude that there is some one who commands, and to whom obedience is paid. It is quite impossible for us to avoid thinking that the wonderful motions, revolutions, and order of those many and great bodies, no part of which is impaired by the countless and infinite succession of ages, must be governed and directed by some supreme intelligent being. Chrysippus, indeed, had a very penetrating genius, yet such is the doctrine which he delivers, that he seems rather to have been instructed by nature than to owe it to any discovery of his own. If, says he, there is anything in the universe which no human reason, ability, or power can make, the being who produced it must certainly be preferable to man. Now, celestial bodies, and all those things which proceed in any eternal order, cannot be made by man. The being who made them is therefore preferable to man. What, then, is that being but a God? If there be no such thing as a Deity, what is there better than man, since he only is possessed of reason, the most excellent of all things? But it is a foolish piece of vanity in man to think there is nothing preferable to him. There is, therefore, something preferable; consequently, there is certainly a God. When you behold a large and beautiful house, surely no one can persuade you it was built for mice and weasels, though you do not see the master. And would it not, therefore, be most manifest folly to imagine that a world, so magnificently adorned with such an immense variety of celestial bodies, of such exquisite beauty, and that the vast sizes and magnitudes of the sea and land were intended as the abode of man, and not as the mansion of the immortal Gods? Do we not also plainly see this, that all the most elevated regions are the best, and that the earth is the lowest region, and is surrounded with the grossest air? So that as we perceive that in some cities and countries the capacities of men are naturally duller, from the thickness of the climate, so mankind, in general, are affected by the heaviness of the air which surrounds the earth, the grossest region of the world. Yet, even from this inferior intelligence of man, we may discover the existence of some intelligent agent that is divine and wiser than ourselves. For, as Socrates says in Xenophon, from whence had man his portion of understanding? And indeed, if any one were to push his inquiries about the moisture and heat which is diffused through the human body, and the earthy kind of solidity existing in our entrails, and that soul by which we breathe, and to ask whence we derive them, it would be plain that we have received one thing from the earth, another from liquid, another from fire, and another from that air which we inhale every time that we breathe. But where did we find that which excels all these things? I mean reason, or, if you please, in other terms, the mind, understanding, thought, prudence, and from whence did we receive it? Shall the world be possessed of every other perfection, and be destitute of this one, which is the most important and valuable of all? But certainly there is nothing better, or more excellent, or more beautiful than the world. And not only there is nothing better, but we cannot even conceive anything superior to it. And if reason and wisdom are the greatest of all perfections, they must necessarily be a part of what we all allow to be the most excellent. Who is not compelled to admit the truth of what I assert by that agreeable, uniform, and continued agreement of things in the universe? Could the earth at one season be adorned with flowers, at another be covered with snow? Or, if such a number of things regulated their own changes, could the approach and retreat of the sun in the summer and winter solstices be so regularly known and calculated? Could the flux and reflux of the sea, and the height of the tides, be affected by the increase or wane of the moon? Could the different courses of the stars be preserved by the uniform movement of the whole heaven? Could these things subsist, I say, in such a harmony of all the parts of the universe, without the continued influence of a divine spirit? If these points are handled in a free and copious manner, as I purpose to do, they will be less liable to the cavils of the Academics. But the narrow, confined way in which Zeno reasoned upon them laid them more open to objection. For as running streams are seldom or never tainted, while standing waters easily grow corrupt, so a fluency of expression washes away the censures of the caviller, while the narrow limits of a discourse which is too concise is almost defenceless. For the arguments which I am enlarging upon are thus briefly laid down by Zeno. That which reasons is superior to that which does not. Nothing is superior to the world. The world, therefore, reasons. By the same rule, the world may be proved to be wise, happy, and eternal, for the possession of all these qualities is superior to the want of them, and nothing is superior to the world. The inevitable consequence of which argument is, that the world, therefore, is a Deity. He goes on, "No part of anything void of sense is capable of perception. Some parts of the world have perception. The world, therefore, has sense." He proceeds and pursues the argument closely. "Nothing," says he, "that is destitute itself of life and reason can generate a being possessed of life and reason. But the world does generate beings possessed of life and reason. The world, therefore, is not itself destitute of life and reason." He concludes his argument in his usual manner, with a simile. If well-tuned pipes should spring out of the olive, would you have the slightest doubt that there was in the olive tree itself some kind of skill and knowledge? Or if the plane tree could produce harmonious lutes, surely you would infer on the same principle that music was contained in the plane tree. Why, then, should we not believe the world is a living and wise being, since it produces living and wise beings out of itself? But as I have been insensibly led into a length of discourse beyond my first design, for I said that, as the existence of the Gods was evident to all, there was no need of any long oration to prove it, I will demonstrate it by reasons deduced from the nature of things. For it is a fact that all beings which take nourishment and increase contain in themselves a power of natural heat, without which they could neither be nourished nor increase. For everything which is of a warm and fiery character is agitated and stirred up by its own motion; but that which is nourished and grows is influenced by a certain regular and equable motion. And as long as this motion remains in us, so long does sense and life remain. But the moment that it abates and is extinguished, we ourselves decay and perish. By arguments like these, Cleanthes shows how great is the power of heat in all bodies. He observes there is no food so gross as not to be digested in a night and a day, and that even in the excrementitious parts which nature rejects, there remains a heat. The veins and arteries seem, by their continual quivering, to resemble the agitation of fire; and it has often been observed, when the heart of an animal is just plucked from the body, that it palpitates with such visible motion as to resemble the rapidity of fire. Everything, therefore, that has life, whether it be animal or vegetable, owes that life to the heat inherent in it. It is this nature of heat which contains in itself the vital power which extends throughout the whole world. This will appear more clearly on a more close explanation of this fiery quality, which pervades all things. Every division, then, of the world, and I shall touch upon the most considerable, is sustained by heat. And first, it may be observed in earthly substances that fire is produced from stones by striking or rubbing one against another; that the warm earth smokes when just turned up, and that water is drawn warm from well springs; and this is most especially the case in the winter season, because there is a great quantity of heat contained in the caverns of the earth, and this becomes more dense in the winter, and on that account confines more closely the innate heat which is discoverable in the earth. It would require a long dissertation, and many reasons would require to be adduced, to show that all the seeds which the earth conceives, and all those which it contains, having been generated from itself, and fixed in roots and trunks, derive all their origin and increase from the temperature and regulation of heat; and that even every liquor has a mixture of heat in it is plainly demonstrated by the effusion of water; for it would not congeal by cold, nor become solid as ice or snow, and return again to its natural state, if it were not that, when heat is applied to it, it again becomes liquefied and dissolved, and so diffuses itself. Therefore, by northern and other cold winds it is frozen and hardened, and in turn it dissolves and melts again by heat. The seas, likewise, we find, when agitated by winds, grow warm; so that from this fact we may understand that there is heat included in that vast body of water. For we cannot imagine it to be external and adventitious heat, but such as is stirred up by agitation from the deep recesses of the seas. And the same thing takes place with respect to our bodies, which grow warm with motion and exercise. And the very air itself, which indeed is the coldest element, is by no means void of heat. For there is a great quantity arising from the exhalations of water, which appears to be a sort of steam occasioned by its internal heat, like that of boiling liquors. The fourth part of the universe is entirely fire, and is the source of the salutary and vital heat which is found in the rest. From hence we may conclude that, as all parts of the world are sustained by heat, the world itself also has such a great length of time subsisted from the same cause, and so much the more because we ought to understand that that hot and fiery principle is so diffused over universal nature, that there is contained in it a power and cause of generation and procreation, from which all animate beings, and all those creatures of the vegetable world, the roots of which are contained in the earth, must inevitably derive their origin and their increase. It is nature, consequently, that continues and preserves the world, and that, too, a nature which is not destitute of sense and reason. For in every essence that is not simple, but composed of several parts, there must be some predominant quality, as, for instance, the mind in man, and in beasts something resembling it, from which arise all the appetites and desires for anything. As for trees and all the vegetable produce of the earth, it is thought to be in their roots. I call that the predominant quality which the Greeks call agemonikon, which must and ought to be the most excellent quality wherever it is found. That, therefore, in which the prevailing quality of all nature resides must be the most excellent of all things, and most worthy of the power and preeminence over all things. Now we see that there is nothing in being that is not a part of the universe, and as there are sense and reason in the parts of it, there must therefore be these qualities, and these too in a more energetic and powerful degree in that part in which the predominant quality of the world is found. The world, therefore, must necessarily be possessed of wisdom, and that element which embraces all things must excel in perfection of reason. The world, therefore, is a God, and the whole power of the world is contained in that divine element. The heat also of the world is more pure, clear, and lively, and consequently better adapted to move the senses than the heat allotted to us, and it vivifies and preserves all things within the compass of our knowledge. It is absurd, therefore, to say that the world which is endued with a perfect, free, pure, spirituous, and active heat is not sensitive, since by this heat men and beasts are preserved, and move, and think; more especially since this heat of the world is itself the sole principle of agitation, and has no external impulse, but is moved spontaneously. For what can be more powerful than the world which moves and raises that heat by which it subsists? For let us listen to Plato, who is regarded as a god among philosophers. He says that there are two sorts of motion, one innate and the other external, and that that which is moved spontaneously is more divine than that which is moved by another power. This self-motion he places in the mind alone, and concludes that the first principle of motion is derived from the mind. Therefore, since all motion arises from the heat of the world, and that heat is not moved by the effect of any external impulse, but of its own accord, it must necessarily be a mind, from whence it follows that the world is animated. On such reasoning is founded this opinion, that the world is possessed of understanding, because it certainly has more perfections in itself than any other nature. For as there is no part of our bodies so considerable as the whole of us, so it is clear that there is no particular portion of the universe equal in magnitude to the whole of it. From whence it follows that wisdom must be an attribute of the world; otherwise man, who is a part of it, and possessed of reason, would be superior to the entire world. And thus, if we proceed from the first rude, unfinished natures to the most superior and perfect ones, we shall inevitably come at last to the nature of the Gods. For, in the first place, we observe that those vegetables which are produced out of the earth are supported by nature, and she gives them no further supply than is sufficient to preserve them by nourishing them and making them grow. To beasts she has given sense and motion, and a faculty which directs them to what is wholesome, and prompts them to shun what is noxious to them. On man she has conferred a greater portion of her favor, inasmuch as she has added reason by which he is enabled to command his passions, to moderate some, and to subdue others. In the fourth and highest degree are those beings which are naturally wise and good, who, from the first moment of their existence, are possessed of right and consistent reason, which we must consider superior to man, and deserving to be attributed to a God; that is to say, to the world, in which it is inevitable that that perfect and complete reason should be inherent. Nor is it possible that it should be said with justice that there is any arrangement of things in which there cannot be something entire and perfect. For as in a vine or in beasts we see that nature, if not prevented by some superior violence, proceeds by her own appropriate path to her destined end; and as in painting, architecture, and the other arts there is a point of perfection which is attainable and occasionally attained, so it is even much more necessary that in universal nature there must be some complete and perfect result arrived at. Many external accidents may happen to all other natures which may impede their progress to perfection, but nothing can hinder universal nature, because she is herself the ruler and governor of all other natures. That, therefore, must be the fourth and most elevated degree, to which no other power can approach. But this degree is that on which the nature of all things is placed. And since she is possessed of this, and she presides over all things, and is subject to no possible impediment, the world must necessarily be an intelligent and even a wise being. But how marvellously great is the ignorance of those men who dispute the perfection of that nature which encircles all things, or who, allowing it to be infinitely perfect, yet deny it to be, in the first place, animated, then reasonable, and lastly, prudent and wise. For how, without these qualities, could it be infinitely perfect? If it were like vegetables, or even like beasts, there would be no more reason for thinking it extremely good than extremely bad. And if it were possessed of reason, and had not wisdom from the beginning, the world would be in a worse condition than man. For man may grow wise, but the world, if it were destitute of wisdom through an infinite space of time past, could never acquire it. Thus it would be worse than man. But as that is absurd to imagine, the world must be esteemed wise from all eternity, and consequently a Deity. Since there is nothing existing that is not defective, except the universe, which is well provided, and fully complete and perfect in all its numbers and parts. For Chrysippus says, very acutely, that as the case is made for the buckler, and the scabbard for the sword, so all things, except the universe, were made for the sake of something else. As, for instance, all those crops and fruits which the earth produces were made for the sake of animals, and animals for man; as the horse for carrying, the ox for the plough, the dog for hunting and for a guard. But man himself was born to contemplate and imitate the world, being in no wise perfect, but, if I may so express myself, a particle of perfection. But the world, as it comprehends all, and as nothing exists that is not contained in it, is entirely perfect. In what, therefore, can it be defective, since it is perfect? It cannot want understanding and reason, for they are the most desirable of all qualities. The same Chrysippus observes, also, by the use of similitudes, that everything in its kind, when arrived at maturity and perfection, is superior to that which is not; as a horse to a colt, a dog to a puppy, and a man to a boy. So whatever is best in the whole universe must exist in some complete and perfect being; but nothing is more perfect than the world, and nothing better than virtue. Virtue, therefore, is an attribute of the world, but human nature is not perfect, and nevertheless virtue is produced in it. With how much greater reason, then, do we conceive it to be inherent in the world? Therefore the world has virtue, and it is also wise, and consequently a Deity. The divinity of the world being now clearly perceived, we must acknowledge the same divinity to be likewise in the stars, which are formed from the lightest and purest part of the ether, without a mixture of any other matter; and being altogether hot and transparent, we may justly say they have life, sense, and understanding. And Cleanthes thinks that it may be established by the evidence of two of our senses, feeling and seeing, that they are entirely fiery bodies; for the heat and brightness of the sun far exceed any other fire, inasmuch as it enlightens the whole universe, covering such a vast extent of space, and its power is such that we perceive that it not only warms, but often even burns; neither of which it could do if it were not of a fiery quality. Since then, says he, the sun is a fiery body, and is nourished by the vapors of the ocean (for no fire can continue without some sustenance), it must be either like that fire which we use to warm us and dress our food, or like that which is contained in the bodies of animals. And this fire, which the convenience of life requires, is the devourer and consumer of everything, and throws into confusion and destroys whatever it reaches. On the contrary, the corporeal heat is full of life, and salutary, and vivifies, preserves, cherishes, increases, and sustains all things, and is productive of sense. Therefore, says he, there can be no doubt which of these fires the sun is like, since it causes all things in their respective kinds to flourish and arrive to maturity. And as the fire of the sun is like that which is contained in the bodies of animated beings, the sun itself must likewise be animated, and so must the other stars also, which arise out of the celestial ardor that we call the sky or firmament. As then some animals are generated in the earth, some in the water, and some in the air, Aristotle thinks it ridiculous to imagine that no animal is formed in that part of the universe which is the most capable to produce them. But the stars are situated in the ethereal space, and as this is an element the most subtle, whose motion is continual, and whose force does not decay, it follows of necessity that every animated being which is produced in it must be endowed with the quickest sense and the swiftest motion. The stars, therefore, being there generated, it is a natural inference to suppose them endued with such a degree of sense and understanding as places them in the rank of Gods. For it may be observed that they who inhabit countries of a pure, clear air have a quicker apprehension and a readier genius than those who live in a thick, foggy climate. It is thought likewise that the nature of a man's diet has an effect on the mind. Therefore it is probable that the stars are possessed of an excellent understanding, inasmuch as they are situated in the ethereal part of the universe, and are nourished by the vapours of the earth and sea, which are purified by their long passage to the heavens. But the invariable order and regular motion of the stars plainly manifest their sense and understanding. For all motion which seems to be conducted with reason and harmony supposes an intelligent principle that does not act blindly, or inconsistently, or at random. And this regularity and consistent course of the stars from all eternity indicates not any natural order, for it is pregnant with sound reason, not fortune, for fortune, being a friend to change, despises consistency. It follows, therefore, that they move spontaneously by their own sense and divinity. Aristotle also deserves high commendation for his observation that everything that moves is either put in motion by natural impulse, or by some external force, or of its own accord, and that the sun and moon and all the stars move, but that those things which are moved by natural impulse are either borne downward by their weight, or upward by their lightness, neither of which things could be the case with the stars, because they move in a regular circle and orbit. Nor can it be said that there is some superior force which causes the stars to be moved in a manner contrary to nature. For what superior force can there be? It follows, therefore, that their motion must be voluntary. And whoever is convinced of this must discover not only great ignorance, but great impiety likewise, if he denies the existence of the Gods. Nor is the difference great whether a man denies their existence, or deprives them of all design and action. For whatever is wholly inactive seems to me not to exist at all. Their existence, therefore, appears so plain that I can scarcely think that man in his senses who denies it. It now remains that we consider what is the character of the Gods. Nothing is more difficult than to divert our thoughts and judgment from the information of our corporeal sight, and the view of objects which our eyes are accustomed to. And it is this difficulty which has had such an influence on the unlearned, and on philosophers also who resembled the unlearned multitude, that they have been unable to form any idea of the immortal Gods, except under the clothing of the human figure, the weakness of which opinion Cotta has so well confuted that I need not add my thoughts upon it. But as the previous idea which we have of the Deity comprehends two things: first of all, that he is an animated being; secondly, that there is nothing in all nature superior to him, I do not see what can be more consistent with this idea and preconception than to attribute a mind and divinity to the world, the most excellent of all beings. Epicurus may be as merry with this notion as he pleases. A man not the best qualified for a joker, as not having the wit and sense of his country. Let him say that a voluble round Deity is to him incomprehensible, yet he shall never dissuade me from a principle which he himself approves; for he is of opinion there are Gods, when he allows that there must be a nature excellently perfect. But it is certain that the world is most excellently perfect, nor is it to be doubted that whatever has life, sense, reason, and understanding must excel that which is destitute of these things. It follows, then, that the world has life, sense, reason, and understanding, and is consequently a Deity. But this shall soon be made more manifest by the operation of these very things which the world causes. In the meanwhile, Velleius, let me entreat you not to be always saying that we are utterly destitute of every sort of learning. The cone, you say, the cylinder, and the pyramid are more beautiful to you than the sphere. This is to have different eyes from other men. But suppose they are more beautiful to the sight only, which does not appear to me. For I can see nothing more beautiful than that figure which contains all others, and which has nothing rough in it, nothing offensive, nothing cut into angles, nothing broken, nothing swelling, and nothing hollow. Yet, as there are two forms most esteemed, the globe in solids (for so the Greek word sphaira, I think, should be construed), and the circle or orb in planes (in Greek κύκλος), and as they only have an exact similitude of parts, in which every extreme is equally distant from the centre, what can we imagine in nature to be more just and proper? But if you have never raked into this learned dust to find out these things, surely, at all events, you natural philosophers must know that equality of motion and invariable order could not be preserved in any other figure. Nothing, therefore, can be more illiterate than to assert, as you are in the habit of doing, that it is doubtful whether the world is round or not, because it may possibly be of another shape, and that there are innumerable worlds of different forms, which Epicurus, if he ever had learned that 2 and 2 are equal to 4, would not have said. But while he judges of what is best by his palate, he does not look up to the palace of heaven, as Ennius calls it. For as there are two sorts of stars, one kind of which measures their journey from east to west by immutable stages, never in the least varying from their usual course, while the other completes a double revolution with an equally constant regularity, from each of these facts we demonstrate the volubility of the world, which could not possibly take place in any but a globular form, and the circular orbits of the stars. And first of all, the sun, which has the chief rank among all the stars, is moved in such a manner that it fills the whole earth with its light, and illuminates alternately one part of the earth, while it leaves the other in darkness. The shadow of the earth interposing causes night, and the intervals of night are equal to those of day. And it is the regular approaches and retreats of the sun from which arise the regulated degrees of cold and heat. His annual circuit is in 365 days, and nearly 6 hours more. At one time he bends his course to the north, at another to the south, and thus produces summer and winter, with the other two seasons, one of which succeeds the decline of winter, and the other that of summer. And so to these 4 changes of the seasons we attribute the origin and cause of all the productions both of sea and land. The moon completes the same course every month which the sun does in a year. The nearer she approaches to the sun, the dimmer light does she yield, and when most remote from it she shines with the fullest brilliancy. Nor are her figure and form only changed in her wane, but her situation likewise, which is sometimes in the north and sometimes in the south. By this course she has a sort of summer and winter solstices, and by her influence she contributes to the nourishment and increase of animated beings, and to the ripeness and maturity of all vegetables. But most worthy our admiration is the motion of those 5 stars, which are falsely called wandering stars; for they cannot be said to wander, which keep from all eternity their approaches and retreats, and have all the rest of their motions in one regular, constant, and established order. What is yet more wonderful in these stars, which we are speaking of, is that sometimes they appear, and sometimes they disappear. Sometimes they advance towards the sun, and sometimes they retreat. sometimes they precede him, and sometimes follow him. Sometimes they move faster, sometimes slower, and sometimes they do not stir in the least, but for a while stand still. From these unequal motions of the planets, mathematicians have called that the great year in which the sun, moon, and 5 wandering stars, having finished their revolutions, are found in their original situation. In how long a time this is effected is much disputed, but it must be a certain and definite period. For the planet Saturn, called by the Greeks Phaenon, which is farthest from the earth, finishes his course in about 30 years. And in his course there is something very singular, for sometimes he moves before the sun, sometimes he keeps behind it, at one time lying hidden in the night, at another again appearing in the morning, and ever performing the same motions in the same space of time, without any alteration, so as to be for infinite ages regular in these courses. Beneath this planet, and nearer the earth, is Jupiter, called Phaethon, which passes the same orbit of the 12 signs in 12 years, and goes through exactly the same variety in its course that the star of Saturn does. Next to Jupiter is the planet Mars, in Greek Prais, which finishes its revolution through the same orbit as the 2 previously mentioned in 24 months, wanting 6 days, as I imagine. Below this is Mercury, called by the Greeks Stilbon, which performs the same course in little less than a year, and is never farther distant from the sun than the space of 1 sign, whether it precedes or follows it. The lowest of the 5 planets, and nearest the earth, is that of Venus, called in Greek Phosphoros. Before the rising of the sun it is called the morning star, and after the setting the evening star. It has the same revolution through the zodiac, both as to latitude and longitude, with the other planets in a year, and never is more than 2 signs from the sun, whether it precedes or follows it. I cannot therefore conceive that this constant course of the planets, this just agreement in such various motions through all eternity, can be preserved without a mind, reason, and consideration. And since we may perceive these qualities in the stars, we cannot but place them in the rank of Gods. Those which are called the fixed stars have the same indications of reason and prudence. Their motion is daily, regular, and constant. They do not move with the sky, nor have they an adhesion to the firmament, as they who are ignorant of natural philosophy affirm. For the sky, which is thin, transparent, and suffused with an equal heat, does not seem by its nature to have power to whirl about the stars, or to be proper to contain them. The fixed stars, therefore, have their own sphere, separate and free from any conjunction with the sky. Their perpetual courses, with that admirable and incredible regularity of theirs, so plainly declare a divine power and mind to be in them, that he who cannot perceive that they are also endowed with divine power must be incapable of all perception whatever. In the heavens, therefore, there is nothing fortuitous, unadvised, inconstant, or variable. All there is order, truth, reason, and constancy, and all the things which are destitute of these qualities are counterfeit, deceitful, and erroneous, and have their residence about the earth, beneath the moon, the lowest of all the planets. He, therefore, who believes that this admirable order and almost incredible regularity of the heavenly bodies, by which the preservation and entire safety of all things is secured, is destitute of intelligence, must be considered to be himself wholly destitute of all intellect whatever. I think, then, I shall not deceive myself in maintaining this dispute upon the principle of Zeno, who went the farthest in his search after truth. Zeno, then, defines nature to be, an artificial fire proceeding in a regular way to generation. For he thinks that to create and beget are especial properties of art, and that whatever may be wrought by the hands of our artificers is much more skilfully performed by nature, that is, by this artificial fire, which is the master of all other arts. According to this manner of reasoning, every particular nature is artificial, as it operates agreeably to a certain method peculiar to itself. But that universal nature, which embraces all things, is said by Zeno to be not only artificial, but absolutely the artificer, ever thinking and providing all things useful and proper. And as every particular nature owes its rise and increase to its own proper seed, so universal nature has all her motions voluntary, has affections and desires, by the Greeks called ορμάς, productive of actions agreeable to them, like us who have sense and understanding to direct us. Such, then, is the intelligence of the universe, for which reason it may be properly termed prudence or providence, in Greek pronia, since her chiefest care and employment is to provide all things fit for its duration, that it may want nothing, and above all, that it may be adorned with all perfection of beauty and ornament. End of Part I. of Book II. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Part II. of Book II. of On the Nature of the Gods, by Marcus Tullius Cicero, translated by Charles Duke Yonge. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Thus far have I spoken concerning the universe, and also of the stars, from whence it is apparent that there is almost an infinite number of Gods, always in action, but without labour or fatigue, for they are not composed of veins, nerves, and bones. Their food and drink are not such as cause humours too gross or too subtle, nor are their bodies such as to be subject to the fear of falls or blows, or in danger of diseases from a weariness of limbs. Epicurus, to secure his Gods from such accidents, has made them only outlines of deities, void of action; but our Gods, being of the most beautiful form, and situated in the purest region of the heavens, dispose and rule their course in such a manner that they seem to contribute to the support and preservation of all things. Besides these, there are many other natures, which have with reason been deified by the wisest Grecians, and by our ancestors in consideration of the benefits derived from them. For they were persuaded that whatever was of great utility to humankind must proceed from divine goodness, and the name of the Deity was applied to that which the Deity produced, as when we call corn Ceres, and wine Bacchus; whence that saying of Terence, "Without Ceres and Bacchus, Venus starves." And any quality also, in which there was any singular virtue, was nominated a Deity, such as faith and wisdom, which are placed among the divinities in the Capitol, the last by Aemilius Scaurus; but faith was consecrated before by Attilius Calatinus. You see the temple of virtue and that of honour repaired by M. Marcellus, erected formerly in the Ligurian war by Q. Maximus. Need I mention those dedicated to help, safety, concord, liberty, and victory, which have been called Deities because their efficacy has been so great that it could not have proceeded from any but from some divine power. In like manner are the names of Cupid, Voluptas, and of Lubentine Venus consecrated, though they were things vicious and not natural, whatever Velleius may think to the contrary, for they frequently stimulate nature in too violent a manner. Everything, then, from which any great utility proceeded was deified, and indeed the names I have just now mentioned are declaratory of the particular virtue of each deity. It has been a general custom likewise that men who have done important service to the public should be exalted to heaven by fame and universal consent. Thus Hercules, Castor, and Pollux, Aesculapius, and Liber became gods. I mean Liber, the son of Semele, and not him whom our ancestors consecrated in such state and solemnity with Ceres and Libera, the difference in which may be seen in our mysteries. But because the offsprings of our bodies are called liberi, children, therefore the offsprings of Ceres are called Liber and Libera. Libera is the feminine, and Liber the masculine. Thus likewise Romulus or Quirinus, for they are thought to be the same, became a god. They are justly esteemed as deities, since their souls subsist and enjoy eternity, from whence they are perfect and immortal beings. There is another reason, too, and that founded on natural philosophy, which has greatly contributed to the number of deities, namely, the custom of representing in human form a crowd of gods, who have supplied the poets with fables, and filled mankind with all sorts of superstition. Zeno has treated of this subject, but it has been discussed more at length by Cleanthes and Chrysippus. All Greece was of opinion that Coelum was castrated by his son Saturn, and that Saturn was chained by his son Jupiter. In these impious fables a physical and not inelegant meaning is contained, for they would denote that the celestial, most exalted and ethereal nature, that is, the fiery nature which produces all things by itself, is destitute of that part of the body which is necessary for the act of generation by conjunction with another. By Saturn they mean that which comprehends the course and revolution of times and seasons. The Greek name for which deity implies as much, for he is called Chronos, which is the same with Chronos, that is, a space of time. But he is called Saturn because he is filled (saturatur) with years, and he is usually feigned to have devoured his children, because time, ever insatiable, consumes the rolling years. But to restrain him from immoderate haste, Jupiter has confined him to the course of the stars, which are as chains to him. Jupiter, that is, Iuans pater, signifies a helping father, whom, by changing the cases, we call Jove, Iuando. The poets call him father of gods and men, and our ancestors the most good, the most great. And as there is something more glorious in itself, and more agreeable to others, to be good, that is, beneficent, than to be great, the title of most good precedes that of most great. This then is he whom Ennius means in the following passage before quoted: "Look up to the refulgent heaven above, which all men call unanimously Jove," which is more plainly expressed than in this other passage of the same poet: "On whose account I'll curse that flood of light, whate'er it is above that shines so bright. Our augurs also mean the same, when, for the thundering and lightning heaven, they say the thundering and lightning Jove. Euripides, among many excellent things, has this: The vast, expanded, boundless sky behold, See it with soft embrace the earth enfold. This own the chief of deities above, And this acknowledge by the name of Jove. The air, according to the Stoics, which is between the sea and the heaven, is consecrated by the name of Juno, and is called the sister and wife of Jove, because it resembles the sky, and is in close conjunction with it. They have made it feminine because there is nothing softer, but I believe it is called Juno, Juando, from helping. To make three separate kingdoms by fable, there remained yet the water and the earth. The dominion of the sea is given, therefore, to Neptune, a brother, as he is called, of Jove, whose name Neptunus, as Portunus, aportu, from aport, is derived nando, from swimming, the first letters being a little changed. The sovereignty and power over the earth is the portion of a God, to whom we, as well as the Greeks, have given a name that denotes riches, in Latin dis, in Greek Pluton, because all things arise from the earth and return to it. He forced away Proserpine, in Greek called Persephone, by which the poets mean the seed of corn. From whence comes their fiction of Ceres, the mother of Proserpine, seeking for her daughter, who was hidden from her. She is called Ceres, which is the same as geres, agerendis frugibus, from bearing fruit, the first letter of the word being altered after the manner of the Greeks, for by them she is called Demeter, the same as Gemeter. Again, he, qui magna vorteret, who brings about mighty changes, is called Mevars, and Minerva is so called because minueret, or minaretur, she diminishes or menaces. And as the beginnings and endings of all things are of the greatest importance, therefore they would have their sacrifices to begin with Janus. His name is derived ab eundo, from passing, from whence thorough passages are called Jani, and the outward doors of common houses are called Janui. The name of Vesta is from the Greeks, the same with their Estia. Her province is over altars and hearths, and in the name of this Goddess, who is the keeper of all things within, prayers and sacrifices are concluded. The Penates, household gods, have some affinity with this power, and are so called either from penus, all kind of human provisions, or because penitus incident, they reside within, from which by the poets they are called penetrales also. Apollo, a Greek name, is called Sol, the sun, and Diana, Luna, the moon. The sun, Sol, is so named either because he is solus, alone, so eminent above all the stars, or because he obscures all the stars, and appears alone as soon as he rises. Luna, the moon, is so called lucendo, from shining. She bears the name also of Lucina, and as in Greece the women in labor invoke Diana Lucifera, so here they invoke Juno Lucina. She is likewise called Diana Omnivaga, not a venando, from hunting, but because she is reckoned one of the 7 stars that seem to wander. She is called Diana because she makes a kind of day of the night, and presides over births, because the delivery is effected sometimes in 7, or at most in 9 courses of the moon, which, because they make mensa spatia (measured spaces), are called menses (months). This occasioned a pleasant observation of Timaeus, as he has many. Having said in his history that the same night in which Alexander was born, the temple of Diana at Ephesus was burned down, he adds, "It is not in the least to be wondered at, because Diana, being willing to assist at the labour of Olympius, was absent from home." But to this Goddess, because adres omnes veniret, "she has an influence upon all things," we have given the appellation of Venus, from whom the word Venustes, beauty, is rather derived than Venus from Venustes. Do you not see, therefore, how, from the productions of nature and the useful inventions of men, have arisen fictitious and imaginary deities, which have been the foundation of false opinions, pernicious errors, and wretched superstitions? For we know how the different forms of the Gods, their ages, apparel, ornaments, their pedigrees, marriages, relations, and everything belonging to them, are adapted to human weakness, and represented with our passions, with lust, sorrow, and anger, according to fabulous history. They have had wars and combats, not only, as Homer relates, when they have interested themselves in 2 different armies, but when they have fought battles in their own defence against the Titans and Giants. These stories of the greatest weakness and levity are related and believed with the most implicit folly. But rejecting these fables with contempt, a Deity is diffused in every part of nature: in earth under the name of Ceres, in the sea under the name of Neptune, in other parts under other names. Yet, whatever they are, and whatever characters and dispositions they have, and whatever name custom has given them, we are bound to worship and adore them. The best, the chastest, the most sacred and pious worship of the Gods is to reverence them always with a pure, perfect, and unpolluted mind and voice. For our ancestors, as well as the philosophers, have separated superstition from religion. They who prayed whole days and sacrificed, that their children might survive them, ut superstites essent, were called superstitious, which word became afterward more general. But they who diligently perused, and, as we may say, read or practised over again all the duties relating to the worship of the Gods, were called religiosi, religious, from religendo, reading over again or practising; as elegantes, elegant, ex eligendo, from choosing, making a good choice; diligentes, diligent, ex diligendo, from attending on what we love; intelligentes, intelligent, from understanding, for the signification is derived in the same manner. Thus are the words superstitious and religious understood, the one being a term of reproach, the other of commendation. I think I have now sufficiently demonstrated that there are Gods, and what they are. I am now to show that the world is governed by the providence of the Gods. This is an important point, which you Academics endeavour to confound, and indeed the whole contest is with you, Cotta. For your sect, Velleius, know very little of what is said on different subjects by other schools. You read, and have a taste only for your own books, and condemn all others without examination. For instance, when you mentioned yesterday that prophetic old dame, Pronia, Providence, invented by the Stoics, you were led into that error by imagining that Providence was made by them to be a particular deity that governs the whole universe, whereas it is only spoken in a short manner; as when it is said, the commonwealth of Athens is governed by the council, it is meant, of the Areopagus; so when we say, the world is governed by Providence, we mean, by the providence of the Gods. To express ourselves, therefore, more fully and clearly, we say, the world is governed by the providence of the Gods. Be not, therefore, lavish of your railleries, of which your sect has little to spare. If I may advise you, do not attempt it. It does not become you. It is not your talent, nor is it in your power. This is not applied to you in particular, who have the education and politeness of a Roman, but to all your sect in general, and especially to your leader, a man unpolished, illiterate, insulting, without wit, without reputation, without elegance. I assert, then, that the universe with all its parts was originally constituted, and has, without any cessation, been ever governed by the providence of the Gods. This argument we Stoics commonly divide into three parts. The first of which is, that the existence of the Gods being once known, it must follow that the world is governed by their wisdom. The second, that as everything is under the direction of an intelligent nature, which has produced that beautiful order in the world, it is evident that it is formed from animating principles. The third is deduced from those glorious works which we behold in the heavens and the earth. First, then, we must either deny the existence of the Gods, as Democritus and Epicurus by their doctrine of images in some sort do; or, if we acknowledge that there are Gods, we must believe they are employed, and that too, in something excellent. Now, nothing is so excellent as the administration of the universe. The universe, therefore, is governed by the wisdom of the Gods. Otherwise, we must imagine that there is some cause superior to the Deity, whether it be a nature inanimate, or a necessity agitated by a mighty force, that produces those beautiful works which we behold. The nature of the Gods would then be neither supreme nor excellent, if you subject it to that necessity, or to that nature by which you would make the heaven, the earth, and the seas to be governed. But there is nothing superior to the Deity. The world, therefore, must be governed by him. Consequently, the Deity is under no obedience or subjection to nature, but does himself rule over all nature. In effect, if we allow the Gods have understanding, we allow also their providence, which regards the most important things. For can they be ignorant of those important things, and how they are to be conducted and preserved? Or do they want power to sustain and direct them? Ignorance is inconsistent with the nature of the Gods, and imbecility is repugnant to their majesty. From whence it follows, as we assert, that the world is governed by the providence of the Gods. But supposing, which is incontestable, that there are Gods, they must be animated, and not only animated, but endowed with reason, united, as we may say, in a civil agreement and society, and governing together one universe, as a republic or city. Thus the same reason, the same verity, the same law, which ordains good and prohibits evil, exists in the Gods as it does in men. From them, consequently, we have prudence and understanding. for which reason our ancestors erected temples to the mind, faith, virtue, and concord. Shall we not then allow the gods to have these perfections, since we worship the sacred and august images of them? But if understanding, faith, virtue, and concord reside in humankind, how could they come on earth unless from heaven? And if we are possessed of wisdom, reason, and prudence, the gods must have the same qualities in a greater degree, and not only have them, but employ them in the best and greatest works. The universe is the best and greatest work, therefore it must be governed by the wisdom and providence of the gods. Lastly, as we have sufficiently shown that those glorious and luminous bodies which we behold are deities, I mean the sun, the moon, the fixed and wandering stars, the firmament, and the world itself, and those other things also which have any singular virtue, and are of any great utility to humankind, it follows that all things are governed by Providence and a divine mind. But enough has been said on the first part. It is now incumbent on me to prove that all things are subjected to nature, and most beautifully directed by her. But first of all, it is proper to explain precisely what that nature is, in order to come to the more easy understanding of what I would demonstrate. Some think that nature is a certain irrational power exciting in bodies the necessary motions; others, that it is an intelligent power, acting by order and method, designing some end in every cause, and always aiming at that end, whose works express such skill as no art, no hand can imitate. For, they say, such is the virtue of its seed, that, however small it is, if it falls into a place proper for its reception, and meets with matter conducive to its nourishment and increase, it forms and produces everything in its respective kind, either vegetables, which receive their nourishment from their roots, or animals endowed with motion, sense, appetite, and abilities to beget their likeness. Some apply the word nature to everything, as Epicurus does, who acknowledges no cause but atoms, a vacuum, and their accidents. But when we say that nature forms and governs the world, we do not apply it to a clod of earth, or piece of stone, or anything of that sort, whose parts have not the necessary cohesion, but to a tree, in which there is not the appearance of chance, but of order and a resemblance of art. But if the art of nature gives life and increase to vegetables, without doubt it supports the earth itself; for, being impregnated with seeds, she produces every kind of vegetable, and, embracing their roots, she nourishes and increases them, while, in her turn, she receives her nourishment from the other elements, and, by her exhalations, gives proper sustenance to the air, the sky, and all the superior bodies. If nature gives vigor and support to the earth, by the same reason she has an influence over the rest of the world. For as the earth gives nourishment to vegetables, so the air is the preservation of animals. The air sees with us, hears with us, and utters sounds with us. Without it, there would be no seeing, hearing, or sounding. It even moves with us, for wherever we go, whatever motion we make, it seems to retire and give place to us. That which inclines to the centre, that which rises from it to the surface, and that which rolls about the centre, constitute the universal world, and make one entire nature. And as there are four sorts of bodies, the continuance of nature is caused by their reciprocal changes. For the water arises from the earth, the air from the water, and the fire from the air; and, reversing this order, the air arises from fire, the water from the air, and from the water the earth, the lowest of the four elements of which all beings are formed. Thus, by their continual motions backward and forward, upward and downward, the conjunction of the several parts of the universe is preserved; a union which, in the beauty we now behold it, must be eternal, or at least of a very long duration, and almost for an infinite space of time. And whichever it is, the universe must of consequence be governed by nature. For what art of navigating fleets, or of marshalling an army, and, to instance the produce of nature, what vine, what tree, what animated form and conformation of their members give us so great an indication of skill as appears in the universe? Therefore, we must either deny that there is the least trace of an intelligent nature, or acknowledge that the world is governed by it. But since the universe contains all particular beings, as well as their seeds, can we say that it is not itself governed by nature? That would be the same as saying that the teeth and the beard of man are the work of nature, but that the man himself is not. Thus the effect would be understood to be greater than the cause. Now the universe sows, as I may say, plants, produces, raises, nourishes, and preserves what nature administers as members and parts of itself. If nature, therefore, governs them, she must also govern the universe. And, lastly, in nature's administration there is nothing faulty. She produces the best possible effect out of those elements which existed. Let any one show how it could have been better, but that can never be; and whoever attempts to mend it will either make it worse, or aim at impossibilities. But if all the parts of the universe are so constituted that nothing could be better for use or beauty, let us consider whether this is the effect of chance, or whether in such a state they could possibly cohere, but by the direction of wisdom and divine providence. Nature, therefore, cannot be void of reason, if art can bring nothing to perfection without it, and if the works of nature exceed those of art. How is it consistent with common sense that, when you view an image or a picture, you imagine it is wrought by art? When you behold afar off a ship under sail, you judge it is steered by reason and art. When you see a dial or water clock, you believe the hours are shown by art, and not by chance. And yet, that you should imagine that the universe, which contains all arts, and the artificers, can be void of reason and understanding. But if that sphere which was lately made by our friend Posidonius, the regular revolutions of which show the course of the sun, moon, and 5 wandering stars, as it is every day and night performed, were carried into Scythia or Britain, who in those barbarous countries would doubt that that sphere had been made so perfect by the exertion of reason? Yet these people doubt whether the universe, from whence all things arise and are made, is not the effect of chance, or some necessity, rather than the work of reason and a divine mind. According to them, Archimedes shows more knowledge in representing the motions of the celestial globe than nature does in causing them, though the copy is so infinitely beneath the original. The shepherd in Attius, who had never seen a ship, when he perceived from a mountain afar off the divine vessel of the Argonauts, surprised and frightened at this new object, expressed himself in this manner: What horrid bulk is that before my eyes, which o'er the deep with noise and vigour flies? It turns the whirlpools up, its force so strong, and drives the billows as it rolls along. The ocean's violence it fiercely braves, runs furious on, and throws about the waves. Swiftly impetuous in its course, and loud, like the dire bursting of a showery cloud, or like a rock forced by the winds and rain, now whirled aloft, then plunged into the main. But hold, perhaps the earth and Neptune jar, and fiercely wage an elemental war; Or Triton with his trident has o'erthrown his den, and loosened from the roots the stone. The rocky fragment from the bottom torn is lifted up, and on the surface borne. At first he is in suspense at the sight of this unknown object; but on seeing the young mariners, and hearing their singing, he says, "Like sportive dolphins with their snouts they roar," and afterwards goes on, "Loud in my ears methinks their voices ring, as if I heard the God Silvanus sing." As at first view the shepherd thinks he sees something inanimate and insensible, but afterward, judging by more trustworthy indications, he begins to figure to himself what it is; so philosophers, if they are surprised at first at the sight of the universe, ought, when they have considered the regular, uniform, and immutable motions of it, to conceive that there is some being that is not only an inhabitant of the celestial and divine mansion, but a ruler and a governor, as architect of this mighty fabric. Now, in my opinion, they do not seem to have even the least suspicion that the heavens and earth afford anything marvellous. For, in the first place, the earth is situated in the middle part of the universe, and is surrounded on all sides by the air which we breathe, and which is called aer, which indeed is a Greek word, but by constant use it is well understood by our countrymen; for indeed it is employed as a Latin word. The air is encompassed by the boundless ether (sky), which consists of the fires above. This word we borrow also, for we use aether in Latin, as well as aer, though Pacuvius thus expresses it: "This of which I speak in Latin is coelum, aether called in Greek," as though he were not a Greek into whose mouth he puts this sentence, but he is speaking in Latin, though we listen as if he were speaking Greek; for, as he says elsewhere, "His speech discovers him a Grecian born." But to return to more important matters. In the sky innumerable fiery stars exist, of which the sun is the chief, enlightening all with his refulgent splendor, and being by many degrees larger than the whole earth. And this multitude of vast fires are so far from hurting the earth and things terrestrial, that they are of benefit to them; whereas, if they were moved from their stations, we should inevitably be burned through the want of a proper moderation and temperature of heat. Is it possible for any man to behold these things, and yet imagine that certain solid and individual bodies move by their natural force and gravitation, and that a world so beautifully adorned was made by their fortuitous concourse? He who believes this may as well believe that if a great quantity of the 21 letters, composed either of gold or any other matter, were thrown upon the ground, they would fall into such order as legibly to form the annals of Ennius. I doubt whether fortune could make a single verse of them. How, therefore, can these people assert that the world was made by the fortuitous concourse of atoms, which have no colour, no quality, which the Greeks call poietes, no sense; or that there are innumerable worlds, some rising and some perishing in every moment of time? But if a concourse of atoms can make a world, why not a porch, a temple, a house, a city, which are works of less labour and difficulty? Certainly those men talk so idly and inconsiderately concerning this lower world, that they appear to me never to have contemplated the wonderful magnificence of the heavens, which is the next topic for our consideration. Well, then, did Aristotle observe, "If there were men whose habitations had been always underground, in great and commodious houses, adorned with statues and pictures, furnished with everything which they who are reputed happy abound with, and if, without stirring from thence, they should be informed of a certain divine power and majesty, and after some time the earth should open, and they should quit their dark abode to come to us, where they should immediately behold the earth, the seas, the heavens, should consider the vast extent of the clouds and force of the winds, should see the sun, and observe his grandeur and beauty, and also his generative power, inasmuch as day is occasioned by the diffusion of his light through the sky, and when night has obscured the earth, they should contemplate the heavens bespangled and adorned with stars, the surprising variety of the moon in her increase and wane, the rising and setting of all the stars, and the inviolable regularity of their courses, when," says he, "they should see these things, they would undoubtedly conclude that there are Gods, and that these are their mighty works." Thus far Aristotle. Let us imagine also as great darkness as was formerly occasioned by the eruption of the fires of Mount Etna, which are said to have obscured the adjacent countries for 2 days, to such a degree that no man could recognize his fellow; but on the third, when the sun appeared, they seemed to be risen from the dead. Now, if we should be suddenly brought from a state of eternal darkness to see the light, how beautiful would the heavens seem! But our minds have become used to it from the daily practice and habituation of our eyes. Nor do we take the trouble to search into the principles of what is always in view, as if the novelty rather than the importance of things ought to excite us to investigate their causes. Is he worthy to be called a man who attributes to chance, not to an intelligent cause, the constant motion of the heavens, the regular courses of the stars, the agreeable proportion and connection of all things, conducted with so much reason that our intellect itself is unable to estimate it rightly? When we see machines move artificially, as a sphere, a clock, or the like, do we doubt whether they are the productions of reason? And when we behold the heavens moving with a prodigious celerity, and causing an annual succession of the different seasons of the year, which vivify and preserve all things, can we doubt that this world is directed, I will not say only by reason, but by reason most excellent and divine? For without troubling ourselves with too refined a subtlety of discussion, we may use our eyes to contemplate the beauty of those things which we assert have been arranged by divine Providence. First, let us examine the earth, whose situation is in the middle of the universe, solid, round, and conglobular by its natural tendency, clothed with flowers, herbs, trees, and fruits, the whole in multitudes incredible, and with a variety suitable to every taste. Let us consider the ever cool and running springs, the clear waters of the rivers, the verdure of their banks, the hollow depths of caves, the cragginess of rocks, the heights of impending mountains, and the boundless extent of plains, the hidden veins of gold and silver, and the infinite quarries of marble. What and how various are the kinds of animals, tame or wild, the flights and notes of birds! How do the beasts live in the fields and in the forests? What shall I say of men who, being appointed, as we may say, to cultivate the earth, do not suffer its fertility to be choked with weeds, nor the ferocity of beasts to make it desolate, who, by the houses and cities which they build, adorn the fields, the isles, and the shores? If we could view these objects with the naked eye, as we can by the contemplation of the mind, nobody at such a sight would doubt there was a divine intelligence. But how beautiful is the sea! How pleasant to see the extent of it! What a multitude and variety of islands! How delightful are the coasts! What numbers and what diversity of inhabitants does it contain! Some within the bosom of it, some floating on the surface, and others by their shells cleaving to the rocks; while the sea itself, approaching to the land, sports so closely to its shores, that those two elements appear to be but one. Next above the sea is the air, diversified by day and night. When rarefied, it possesses the higher region; when condensed, it turns into clouds, and with the waters which it gathers enriches the earth by the rain. Its agitation produces the winds; it causes heat and cold according to the different seasons. It sustains birds in their flight, and, being inhaled, nourishes and preserves all animated beings. Add to these, which alone remaineth to be mentioned, the firmament of heaven, a region the farthest from our abodes, which surrounds and contains all things. It is likewise called ether, or sky, the extremest bounds and limits of the universe, in which the stars perform their appointed courses in a most wonderful manner; among which the sun, whose magnitude far surpasses the earth, makes his revolution round it, and by his rising and setting causes day and night, sometimes coming near towards the earth, and sometimes going from it. He every year makes two contrary reversions from the extreme point of its course. In his retreat the earth seems locked up in sadness; in his return it appears exhilarated with the heavens. The moon, which, as mathematicians demonstrate, is bigger than half the earth, makes her revolutions through the same spaces as the sun; but at one time approaching, and at another receding from, the sun, she diffuses the light which she has borrowed from him over the whole earth, and has herself also many various changes in her appearance. When she is found under the sun and opposite to it, the brightness of her rays is lost; but when the earth directly interposes between the moon and sun, the moon is totally eclipsed. The other wandering stars have their courses round the earth in the same spaces, and rise and set in the same manner. Their motions are sometimes quick, sometimes slow, and often they stand still. There is nothing more wonderful, nothing more beautiful. There is a vast number of fixed stars, distinguished by the names of certain figures, to which we find they have some resemblance. End of Part II. Of Book II. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards.